Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. We're thrilled to have Max Allan Collins and A. Brad Schwartz with their new nonfiction. It reads like fiction. It's Scarface and the Untouchable, Al Capone, Eliot Ness, and the Battle for Chicago. Well, Max and Brad, welcome to Anderson's Naperville. It's a real thrill to have you guys here.
Well, it's great to be here, and what a great store.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, we've been here a long time, so we have a long history. So, but I just want to thank you, and how exciting for this book. It's not even out a week yet, so about 6 days. But what reviews it's getting, and reviews, the blurbs on the book are absolutely phenomenal. I'm so impressed. You guys have to be so pleased with the reaction that's already getting before a lot of people have had a chance to read it.
I know, and Sarah Paretsky, who's Chicagoan of great renown, is something of a pal of mine, but she just loved the book.
Yeah.
And
Oscar Goodman, former mayor of Las Vegas, who identifies as a former mob attorney, really enjoyed. I was kind of apprehensive when we sent him the book, knowing that he represented sort of many of Capone's successors and knows that world, and to have him say that it meets his standard of accuracy made me feel very good.
Well, it's gotten some great reviews as well, and you should be very proud of this. So we're thrilled to have you guys here to talk about this book. So I know it's only been out 6 days, but what are you hearing from readers? I mean, your fans and those who know you from your first book with Orson Welles and The War of the Worlds.
Well, I did through my website, maxallancollins.com. Your viewers are smart enough to put the www on the front, right? But I gave 10 advance copies out to people, saying, if you like it, put something on the various sites, and they have all been stellar.
3 5-star reviews so far.
Yeah.
And they talk about it, and some of the reviewers talk about it as reading like a historical novel, as reading like a novel, and yet the underpinnings of it are this incredible research that was. I did some, because it's a misnomer to say that people have this idea that I wrote it and he did the research, but that's not true.
Okay.
He actually did more research than I did, but we both did the writing.
Yeah.
I would say you concentrated more on Eliot Ness.
Writing that part, yeah.
And I concentrated more on Al Capone, and then we kind of traded back and forth and edited each other. He's a fine writer. He is, he's a Princeton doctorate candidate.
I know he is. Yeah, we'll talk about that too. But I just think it's so fascinating, this collaboration, because here you're a crime novelist. You've written in so many different genres, from graphic novels, you've done film, you've done all, a one-man play on Eliot Ness.
Yes.
And all those different things you've done, and you have a huge fan following of your crime fiction. And here you are, this academic researcher who's working on his doctorate at Princeton in history. And I just think this collaboration is really incredible, because the best fiction for me is nonfiction. It reads like fiction, so it's that narrative nonfiction that is so compelling that you got to just read it to the end.
Well, I have written a lot of historical crime fiction and always researched the books as if I were getting ready to do a nonfiction work. And it took some convincing from Brad to get me, because I said, I've said everything there is to say about Eliot Ness. I did my one-man, did 4 novels. He's in the Nathan Heller books. Did the one-man play, which is going to be out on Blu-ray in October.
Great.
But he's pretty convincing.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling with this. But I want to know, with collaborations like this, I know you guys met in a bookstore. So tell us a little bit about that first time you met, and how the seeds or the spark got started for Scarface and the Untouchable.
I think you should go way back to the beginning.
Yes. You mentioned he's got quite a fan following through all the different media that he's worked in, and I began as one of those fans, really through Dick Tracy, which you wrote for a number of years. You did the tie-in novel for the Warren Beatty film, which was the first book of yours I'm pretty sure I ever read. I listened to it on audio cassette. I was that little, probably about 5 or 6. I loved Dick Tracy as a kid. I loved that film. And at a certain point, thanks to my mother, who recommended I watch the Kevin Costner film The Untouchables, made the same discovery that you had made a few years ahead of me, which was that this comic strip character that I'd always loved had a real life counterpart who was remarkably similar. And we'll talk maybe a little bit later about how similar he turns out to be.
Right.
But seeing that film and learning that there was a real Dick Tracy in some form inspired me to read everything that I could, and that of course led me to your Ness novels, your Nathan Heller books, everything I could find that tied into the era of Ness and Capone. And all of those historical novels, and this is really, I don't know if you realize the extent to which you've impacted me here, all of those novels have an afterword where you talk about the research that you did, this is what's true, this is what's not, these are the composite characters I created, this is what I was basing it on, and going really into the detail of how you put those books together. And you always would say, your method was to research the definitive book and write a private eye novel instead. And as I'm reading these as a 10, 11, 12 into high school.
You were reading that smut at that age?
Yeah. Don't tell my mom. But I was learning the profession of a historian in the most, at beginning.
But in a compelling way to read it, though.
Exactly.
Right.
And being inspired to seek out the true story, to look at newspaper articles, to look at this microfilm of the Ness papers that you rediscovered in Cleveland. And at a certain point, having read a lot of nonfiction about this subject, having seen how Ness was often mischaracterized compared to what I had seen in the historical record as a 14, 15-year-old doing this research, and then getting to know you going to a signing at the Centuries Loose bookstore in Forest Park in Chicago, and really loving your work and really being fascinated with Eliot Ness, and you sort of taking me under your wing. I would go to book signings that you would do, and eventually you and your wonderful wife Barb would say, why don't we go out to dinner afterward, and we would talk writing, and you always had this idea of a novel that would tell the story of the Untouchables from the alternating perspectives of Capone and Ness.
Back and forth.
And you told me that very soon after we met. And so as I go off to the University of Michigan, I'm learning to be a historian, being trained in the craft of research, doing my thesis, which became my first book on the Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast.
Broadcast hysteria.
Orson Welles' War of the Worlds and the Art of Fake News.
Fake news.
Thank you.
Which is so apropos. Right.
And as I'm picking up all this training, we had the thought that you're a veteran, skilled storyteller. I'm being trained as an academic historian. We could combine our talents and really do this story right in a way that it hadn't been done before, and to take that kernel of an idea and turn it into, but really to have the bibliography, the source notes, the sort of nonfiction gravitas, so that all the research that you had done and then I came in and contributed to entered the historical record as the definitive work.
So what is the time frame? When did you guys decide that this was the book you were going to, featuring, Al Capone and...
3 years ago?
Well, our initial conversation was back in 2011, when we were, as we often did, complaining about a lot of what had been written. And eventually I said, we need to stop complaining and do something about this. And I was still in college at that time. So I had to publish my first book. There was some convincing that had to be done on my part before I could drag him into this. But yeah, about 2013 we started working on it just as a prospective idea. In 2015 it became a book. And the initial idea, you can kind of see how hefty it is. The initial idea was to follow them both cradle to grave, to tell the full story, because Ness has this remarkable second act. When he goes to Cleveland, he revolutionizes the police department, battles the mob, chases one of America's first serial killers, and then very late in the game, you should tell that part of the story.
No, you're doing fine.
Oh, well.
No, that was one of my questions.
Right.
I'd read that you guys wanted to basically tell about their childhoods and,
go
all the way from beginning to end. But what made you change that idea?
Well, we actually didn't change the idea. What happened was I had some health problems, and there was a period of about 3 months where we had the contract for the book, and he started without me. He got started, and I was just out of the loop. I was loopy. Not in the loop. And so as I recovered from this medical stuff, I thought, well, I got to get into the game now. And so we went to New York. Is it bad taste for you to mention we went to New York for me to get the Grand Master Award from the Mr. Writers of America?
I say that's okay to me.
Is that all right?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay, so that's okay. So that's 2017. Not that long ago.
No.
So we're sitting down. I thought, was an opportunity to meet the editor, because I'd only talked to him on the phone once or twice. And you, having been at Princeton, had been in and seen him any number of times.
Yeah.
So my wife Barbara and I went out to lunch with him, and he kind of wanted a progress report, and I'm saying, well, if everything's going great, just what do you want? When do you want this is the delivery date? All that publishing stuff.
Sure.
He said, everything's fine as long as you stay at right around 100,000 words, because we want to give it to, we want to bring it out Father's Day. They're originally going to bring it out as a Father's Day book, and they said, and dads don't like to read books quite that long, so stay right at 100,000 words. I go, oh, okay, and I'm thinking, we just hit about 150,000, and we had gotten to, and we were at the end of the Chicago story.
Right.
So we sat down and said, this really is already a book.
Right.
Yeah.
They want a book.
It's a very complete story, and you don't have to. The second part is just totally different characters. It carries through similar themes, but it's very much a change of scene.
So we basically went back to the editor and said, as we've written this, and some of it was baloney, I will admit, but we said, as we've been working on this, we've decided we really want to just concentrate on the Chicago half of the story. And so we actually spent some time getting it closer to 100,000 words. Then the craziest, most delightful thing happened from this editor, which is he basically said,
because initially we just ended the book kind of where the final chapter ends now. There was no epilogue.
And he wanted more. And I said, well, we're going to be over 100,000 words if we do more. And he didn't care. At
You're
this
not
point,
even including the sources at the end.
No.
No. And so, Brad wrote a draft of an epilogue, which really pulled everything together and took us up not only through the lives of Capone and Ness in a shorthand kind of way, but where Chicago went over those years, how Capone became an icon, how Ness became kind of weirdly a pariah, and he did a fantastic job on this thing. And usually there's a real mix of our writing. But I looked at this and I said, I really don't think there's much that needs to be done to this. And so I did what I would call a very light edit on this. And that epilogue, which is, I think, the best thing in the book, is largely Brad's work.
Okay. So your editor, William Morrow, which
Peter
is
Hubbard,
a part
yes.
of HarperCollins, which is a great New York publisher. What was it like working with them and him as your editor? Was
so supportive.
He's terrific.
Yeah, because they do some great nonfiction there. So,
Amazingly enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And like you said, he to have the faith in us and in the book to come back and say, well, this is heftier than you expected, and then to invite us on board to carry it forward in a second volume. In a few years.
Because basically we then sold him the rest of the book.
Well, that was my question at the end of this conversation. Yeah, because
We do have to write it. I mean,
well, yeah, I know.
Right.
But
the
people
research
will
has
want
been
to
done.
know.
Yeah.
So, in the course of doing this book together, I know you did a lot of this just by email, going back and forth, but how many times did you actually meet face to face?
Well, not that often. I think around 3 times.
Over the entire course of the book, about 3 times. Last time I saw you when we had our planning session for the second book was back in May, and I hadn't seen you since June of 2016, so about 2 years. But we would talk on the phone constantly, and at a certain point when we were in the midst of the collaboration, if you looked at my iPhone, the call list is all Max Allan Collins, Max Allan Collins, Max Allan Collins. And I did have the thought, I wish I could show this to my 14-year-old self, and it would just blow his mind that his favorite author is calling him every hour on the hour.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All the research you guys did, was there anything, because both of you already knew a lot about these two men, but what were some of those facts that you found, and what single piece of research was just sort of a mind blower for you that changed your ideas about Eliot Ness or Al Capone?
Well, these may seem minor, but they were to us mind blowing because we had read everything we could lay our hands on about Ness, and we discovered, and I don't know, maybe somebody else reported this, but I never noticed it. Ness and Capone basically lived on the same street in Chicago for quite a number of years.
South Prairie, on the
South Prairie.
In houses that are mirror images of each other while they're beginning their careers.
That was so interesting. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the fact that Eliot Ness, who's famous for being the most incorruptible, honest lawman in American history, lied about his age on the employment forms because they had changed the the requirements, and he had to
was
bump
1
his
year
age
too
up.
young.
He had to bump his age
It was
up a year.
25. You had to be 25.
Right,
is that
he was
it?
24.
Yeah. How interesting.
And
Yeah.
for me, you know, I mean, you mentioned we'd read a lot and we learned a lot, and we had to unlearn a lot too, because
Yeah.
you said at
Sure,
one point
yeah.
that we had to, you know, it's like nobody's ever written this before. When you go back to the primary sources,
Right.
you discover a very different story. And for me, it's a more nuanced answer to your question, which is, you know, Ness, at the end of his life, when he was in some bad business situations, he was very hurting for money. And he did what he had resisted doing for his entire life up to that point, which is agree to collaborate on a book about his Capone experiences with a sports writer named Oscar Fraley. And the book is 60 years old. It's been disparaged for about 59 years, you know, as total fiction, as being self-aggrandizing, and even more sympathetic writing that's been done about Ness has tended to take that on at face value. And we had the idea of, well, let's actually compare the book to the historical record as much as we could. And, you know, there were things in there that I thought, oh, of course that was made up. That's certainly not true. And we were able to find multiple sources confirming them. Wow. And for me, you know, that was in some way the great discovery, that if Ness said he did something, he did.
So he really was that incorruptible or that untouchable kind of person, right?
Right, but the ghostwriter took all these things that Ness told him,
Right.
and Ness wrote a short memoir that was really self-effacing.
Yeah.
And he put things in whatever order he thought would make a good story. And so
Invented
that's
dialogue.
So that's the
and
part
invented
that's
dialogue.
right.
And the only thing I know that Ness did that was in that vein was Ness was married 3 times.
Yes.
And he made his first wife the only wife throughout his whole, as if he'd been dating her back probably 20 years before he met her.
And just
So he did also lie about that. But in terms of these wild escapades of, you know, knocking down brewery doors with a truck with a ram on the front of it, all of that stuff is for real.
Or parading all the trucks they'd confiscated past Capone's headquarters in the Lexington Hotel. I honestly, for sure, thought that was made up. And then we found an interview with a Prohibition agent who talked about it. The daughter of one of the Untouchables remembers her father talking about that before that book came out. And we spoke to somebody who also remembered watching the Untouchables series with his grandfather, or his grandfather, who'd been a crime scene photographer in the era. And when he saw that scene, he said the whole show was made up. But the truck parade in front of Capone's headquarters, that actually happened. So multiple sources confirming the story in the book.
So I know in the prologue, you talk a little about, Max, you wrote the prologue. We're
Right.
talking about a lot of the other
Introduction.
books and the films.
The introduction. And I've gotten into some trouble for that.
No.
I've had my wrist slapped about that because, and there was an otherwise very favorable review. It was like, 5 stars for the book, 1 star for the introduction, but I basically take on some of the not a lot of books, but 3 or 4 books that were inaccurate. And some of these
in very specific ways.
But we did it in very specific ways.
Right.
It's been suggested that I should have just done it vaguely. I should have said, well, these books were somewhat inaccurate. But but I feel like if you're going to try to do the definitive version, you have to be specific about what people got wrong. And really that was all I was trying to do.
Yeah.
As far as the Untouchables movie, the Brian De Palma film,
And David Mamet wrote.
I think it's a very entertaining film. I think De Palma's a terrific filmmaker on it, but there were some dumb things in it.
Yeah.
I mean, like having a jury switched in the middle of a trial. How does that work? Like having Mounties chasing somebody around because they had bought rum in a country where rum is legal. These things just would have been easy to fix.
Yeah. Right.
And so I did complain about that. That probably the most egregious one is Frank Nitti, the successor to Capone, essentially, is thrown off a rooftop by Eliot Ness, who was not that kind of person.
I met a gentleman who knew Ness near the end of his life. He's still alive, 94, I think. Lives in Pennsylvania. And I asked him, have you seen the films and the TV shows? How do the portrayals compare? And he started laughing and said, that scene where he threw Frank Nitti off a building, that was just ridiculous. But the only thing I
Oh,
would
he wasn't that type of man. That
not
would
at
have
all.
done anything
Not
like
he
that.
hated
a movie
guns. He
is a
hated
movie.
violence.
And
Right.
we're
And
not.
You do have to take that dramatic license, I
Right.
guess, in some points.
And the only thing I would
Well, I kind of
yeah.
think his dramatic license should have been revoked on those areas.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to what you say was you were accused of trashing previous books, which I think apparently the reviewer doesn't know what goes on in the kind of graduate seminars I sit in, which is serious trashing of books. But you know, you were pointing out often a lot of what historians, at least academic historians, do is looking at trends in literature, pointing out. And this was a definite trend. This was a way that Ness in particular, but also Capone, have been characterized pretty exclusively in nonfiction works. And so to identify that trend with specific examples and point out why we think it's wrong is not only our fair game for a historian, but also I think our responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I think there's over 90 pages of source material in the back of the sources, and so I think this will probably end up being the definitive.
Well, thank you.
That was the idea.
That's the idea. So
It also works very well as a doorstop if you
No,
if you
and
need
if
it.
So
it's
buy
like-
two is what he's saying.
okay, exactly. So Prohibition in Chicago. What do you think that made Chicago so ripe for the rise of Al Capone and his outfit?
Well, I do know that Capone, like Ness, saw his field of endeavor in a professional way. I think Capone looked at this and said, "This is a chance to be a professional
Sure.
criminal, to have a business as opposed to we're going to knock over a bank or we're going to knock over a grocery store, we're going to burgle a house. Here's something that has some potential as a long-term business." Interestingly, Ness, who thought about being a lawyer at one point, decided that the law enforcement field was ripe for professionalism, for somebody to come in and treat it like a profession, not just be gendarmes, or stormtroopers for that matter. And Ness was a pioneer in forensics, and mention some of the things
Well,
that.
sure. Forensics, the lie detector, he knew the
Which
inventors,
is a
a lot of
Chicago
what's going on in
invention.
Chicago. But that's, as a result, law enforcement, and Ness was at the center of this and leading it, was having to professionalize itself and modernize because people like Capone were professionalizing
Right.
and modernizing.
Yeah.
And you had this very unique situation in Chicago at the start of Prohibition where you had these long-term vice gangs that had been involved in the levee, the red light district, with prostitution, with gambling, selling alcohol, which was legal back then, obviously. And so they'd built relationships. I mean, they came from the same neighborhoods and were boyhood friends with the local cops, the aldermen, the government.
Right.
And so when alcohol is outlawed, when there's this new growth industry that people who have been making their living with brothels and casinos suddenly can jump in and fill this need, all of that infrastructure is already there. And Capone, who's born in Brooklyn but gets brought out to Chicago around 1919, involved with a fellow by the name of Johnny Torrio, who was really Capone's mentor and role model, the kind of person who he wanted to be, a criminal who lives like a respectable businessman. He sees the value in this, but he also sees that all these cowboys, really on the north side, who are still doing robberies and blowing safes and things like that, they see the possibility too. And so because Torrio and when Capone takes over, their organization professionalized, they have these long-standing relationships. They don't just get in open gun battles, they plan targeted assassinations. They end up on top because they are more sophisticated in many cases than their competitors.
Yeah.
But you have these rackets that are businesses, the prostitution and gambling. But you have with Prohibition something more than a racket. You have a business that appeals to a wide, people who go to church and mean it would still go to a speakeasy, because it was something that it was a part of. It was legislating morality in a way that just was not popular or accepted by the common man. And it makes them even though actually it wasn't illegal to buy, but still there was a sense that this vast swath of the public had become lawbreakers.
Right. Yeah.
And so Capone is just saying, hey, I'm just a businessman and I've got customers, and how am I any different from anybody else?
And I love the way you started the book off with
St. Valentine's Day.
Yeah, a cold, misty morning in
Yep.
February.
Yep.
So that was a great way to open the book. So, question for both of you.
Yes.
What's next for each one of you as an author, and the collaboration I think we talked a little bit about before we started.
Well, I'm just about to start one of my continuations of the late Mickey Spillane's My Camera Stories. I've been working with the estate, and Mickey had chosen me as essentially
honor.
his successor,
Yeah.
and I've been gradually completing books, and I'm really up to about the 11th or 12th book now, and that's a lot of fun and an honor, a real honor for me.
I would say.
And as for right after that, I will be working on my draft of the Untouchable and the Butcher, which is the next book, and he's working on it right now.
Which I'm hip deep in, yeah.
Wow.
So, and then I have to write a dissertation at some
Yeah,
point
I'm wondering
in
how
time.
you're doing this with getting your
I'm wondering myself.
your PhD with all of this. So I'm very impressed with these, you guys.
Have you thought about the literary accomplishments of Max Allan Collins for your dissertation?
Do you really want to be subject of an American history dissertation?
Maybe not.
No.
I don't want to be history. I want to be the
Exactly.
present.
But I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me. We're so excited about this book. And
Well, you're awfully good at this.
well, it's you made it easy. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and please come back for the next book. You have to. You have to promise.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
What a great conversation we've had with two authors who've collaborated on one of the best pieces of nonfiction this year. It's Max Allan Collins and A. Brad Schwartz, Scarface and the Untouchable, Al Capone, and Eliot Ness and the Battle for Chicago. You've got to read this one. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.